Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we have author Jeffrey Blount with the Emancipation of Evan Walls. If you're not alert to the injustices in society today, especially racism, this book will open your eyes. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. So when did you start writing this book?
Actually, in the 1980s, and I was reading an article about a young boy who was living in what we call the projects back in the day, and who was just this brilliant kid. You know, we would have referred to him as young, gifted, and black. And he loved going to school. And as a reporter wrote, he paid for that oftentimes on his way home. He was physically and emotionally abused by his peers, his African-American peers, because they saw what he was doing somehow to be, color-coded white. And I had some experience with this, but nothing like this little kid. And I started doing some more research, and I started to find more children who were having this issue. And I just thought that, I had come to believe that writing was one of my strengths. And this was a story that I had to tell. And so it began all the way back in the 80s.
Wow, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Why did you choose fiction over nonfiction to present the topics that are in here? Because it deals with racism on so many different levels. And it brings you through this journey. And you really had me in tears throughout the book. For this poor little boy, it didn't matter, what color he was. It was just, you just wouldn't want that to happen to any child.
Yeah.
And it just broke my heart.
Well, one of the reasons probably the main reason I chose fiction over nonfiction, is it was a bit of my story. And I didn't want to write, if I was going to write a nonfiction book, it would have to be through that lens, through a memoir almost, And I didn't want it to be Jeffrey's story, because I think sometimes we read a memoir and we think, well, that was a beautiful story. That was a powerful story about that one life. But we can set that life and everything with it aside because it's just that one person's story. So I thought that if I wrote fiction, typically speaking, when we're writing fiction, it can be about an issue, but it's a made up story that, we focus on what we want to focus on. But it can leave the impression when you're finished that this is a societal issue, not just one person's story. And that's what I wanted people to understand by when they finish The Emancipation of Evan Walls, that they realize this isn't just one person's story. This is a lot of people living this story. And not only that, it's affecting all of us, because we all lose when people like Evan Walls, bright little kids like Evan Walls, don't live up to their potential because they're afraid to.
Yes. And you could see that with what happened to his brother in the story.
Absolutely.
But I was really shocked at the way that he got stuck between the two communities, and the way that a lot of people in the white community really encouraged him.
Yes.
But the black community really wanted to hold him back. They were just so angry about him because he was learning.
Right. And it's an unfortunate truth. It's a reality. Even today, only months ago, Jerome Adams, the outgoing Surgeon General, was profiled in the Washington Post. And here's a man in his, mid to late 40s. And the article was really supposed to be his battle with COVID, and he didn't have it, but as being a leader and how we deal with COVID. But we end up talking about how he spent his whole life trying to prove he was Black enough, which is what Evan did, and how he was, has been devastated and he's scarred by the fact that he's had to live between the races. It's a problem that is hidden in plain sight within the African American community. We don't like to talk about it. In one point, because we feel like some of us feel like if we acknowledge publicly that this is an issue that we could actually be hurting ourselves in terms of education, then some white people will say, see, it isn't institutional racism, it's in the Black community. That's the problem. But we know that systemic racism is the huge umbrella that this story exists beneath. It wouldn't exist if it weren't for systemic racism, but it's a hard thing for the community to talk about.
Definitely. But I think that the way you went back with the grandmother, the way that she grew up and threw in parts of that, you showed the historical relevance, the slave trader that you quoted on how to treat slaves and tear them down.
Right.
And just, it was more about dumbing people down. And that happens in every culture.
It does. The difference here is, and it's because people have said, that exactly what you're saying, and that led into, kids go through this kind of thing all the time. They're bullied all the time. They're told they're geeks all the time. Your thing. But what they don't say, at least I have never heard a white kid say to another white kid, "You're no longer white. You can't be part of the white community." That's the devastating part of this thing. And that's the devastating part that Evan has to go through. So in this book, my wife likes to say, nobody comes out unscathed. You see racism at its core from many of the white, the white folks in Canaan, in the town. You see fear of that, fear of moving into the spaces of white people from the Black community. And you see an entrenched hatred from the Black community because of the generations of what they have gone through. And then you see a little boy trying to navigate his way, and every step he takes is like he makes everybody mad. Every step he takes brings anger from both sides. And so he has to navigate that. And if it wasn't for those conversations with Mama Jenny, who I might say some of those conversations readers have been so responsive to, the conversation with Mama Jenny about putting his life in perspective and the world in perspective, and how he has to keep fighting the good fight.
Definitely. And it was such a struggle for him. I mean, he only had two people he can count on. He had Bojack and he had his grandmother. And they were the only two people encouraging him to keep moving forward. But I thought the ending was good. So no matter what your race is, no matter what your background is, you have to find the places that you fit in.
Yes.
And the people that accept you for the choices that you made for yourself, for your life and where you wanted to go. And that was such a strong message. But how he got there, I read it for 3 days. I keep having to put it down. But I mean, I was just in tears. It just tore through me, broke my heart a million times.
Well, I'm happy for that. I'm sorry to say that. I'm happy for that. And I'll tell you that, it was a very emotional experience for me writing it. But that's when I knew that other people would be affected by it. Robert Frost says, if there's no tears in the writer, there are no tears in the reader. So when I knew that I was emotionally touched by this, I had a feeling that other people would be as well. And one of the reasons I could have chosen this story. I mean, it's not just kids who go through this phenomenon. It happens to adults as well. But I chose kids because we care about kids, and we want to do the best for children. When children hurt, we all hurt the most. So when I decided that that little boy who inspired me from the newspaper, that my character had to be like him, had to be young, had to be innocent, and had to be someone who needed the village to help fight for him. So that's why you get that young kid. And that's why I think there's emotion. And also the whole idea of fiction creating so much empathy in readers. And why does that happen? There's a lot of brain study about fiction and how it affects us. So if I tell you a great story, whatever the story is, let's say I ran down the street and got chased by a dog, and I ran up on top of a car and all this. If I tell you that story beautifully, your brain actually does not separate itself from the story. You now become part of the story, which is why we cry at emotional movies, which is why we jump in a theater when you're afraid at a horror movie. Your brain puts you in that position. So when you're reading that book, you become that character a little bit, and you create, and then the writer's trying to create the empathy. So when my reader becomes that character, they're going to care about that character, and they're going to understand what that character went through. And by the time it's over, they're going to want to do something for that character or people like that character. And that was a mission, mission number one for the book.
And you've won awards for it already.
Yes. And I'm pleased by that, because what it means is that people, took the time to read it and decided that it was worthy of being read. And I think every author would like to have, some of that feedback, to let you know that all these hours you spent by yourself creating actually work for something.
But Jeffrey, your background, you're a writer. You've written for numerous publications.
Yes.
So really, there's still that confidence, or not so much confidence, but struggle to believe that they're going to appreciate your writing.
Oh, sure.
Really,
sure,
you've been everywhere.
But and here's what I've learned. I agree. I used to hear people say this all the time. Writers like Margaret Atwood and John Irving, and people say you have to write for yourself. And so you do, but you still don't realize or recognize what that will mean when in the library, when readers pick it up. My agent said to me, we had this conversation early on, and it just stuck with me. She said, you can write something and put your words out there, but you can't know how people are going to respond to your words, because they bring their own politics, they bring their own lens of life to your story, and it reflects on them differently maybe than what you thought it would be. So you just can't be sure. So that little bit of just can't be sure actually makes me work harder to make the plot tighter, make everything realistic in that it actually could happen, and make the stories of the lives of the characters realistic, something that people can grab and hold on to and believe.
I think that came out, I read a lot of the reviews, but more than the reviews, when I opened the book and I read the dedication to your wife, and I found out more about who you were, I'm like, wow, this is going to be a historical fiction book at its best, because he cares, and he probably has more knowledge about what happened during that time period than most other writers that write historical fiction. So tell me a little bit about the research.
There was several pieces to it. So there is Evan himself. And so I wanted to research a whole bunch of the stories of the children so I could understand, I could create a character study that was the kind of complicated person that Evan is, that I could create the kind of, mental aspects that I needed for this character to respond in certain ways. So there was a lot of research about the children. And there was just stories about children. There were court cases I read about children who were involved in this issue. There were academic papers. All of those helped me create Evan Walls. Then I thought, okay, where do I want to put it? I want this book, as we just talked about, to be something emotional. And for it to be that emotional, it should come from an emotional place with me. And that would be my hometown. I grew up on a farm. I grew up in southeastern Virginia. And I wanted to reflect those feelings I had in the story. And then I wanted to give texture to the story by researching, I didn't have to research my town a whole lot, but there was research, historical research about things that were happening in the time. At the beginning of the story, they talk about, the Applegates, the going off to march in specific marches. So those kinds of things I wanted to get right. And then I just once I had the setting, once I had Evan's characters, and then I could build around those two, I was able to create the story that I wanted to create. But the main parts were creating a powerful character that people could love, people could fret for and care about, and then putting him in a situation. In 1968, integration is about to happen. All of those things to heighten the tension and super focus everybody, the reader's eyes and hearts and minds on those particular issues that led him into the battle that he was fighting.
Well, you definitely did that part. What about with integration or interrogation and the porches? Why were porches essential to this story?
Because this is part of the research of my hometown and part of the South. Porches are another church. They really are. People, when you didn't grow up with air conditioning, in the coolest part of the night, or in the morning, and even in the warmest part of the day, there's still shade to be found on that porch with some iced tea and those metal rocking chairs and those kinds of things. That's where people talked, and that's where you've often heard of people talking about, or particularly men gathering in the barbershop and having political conversations and all that. Well, families did that on the porch. My great grandmother, we would go to her porch every Sunday night, and I hinted a little bit about this in the book. And I loved sitting at the feet of the older folks on those porches, listening to the conversations, and those conversations, the essence, the feel, the flow of those conversations, the voices, I tried to recreate those in the dialect in the book. So I have never known a family from the South, truthfully, unless they were living in an apartment or something in town, where a porch, called many different things, they call it the garret, like in Mississippi, where the porch doesn't hold a place of honor. Because that's where kids learn about life through osmosis, through the conversations that the old folks have. And that's where the comfort is. That's where you sit. If you don't have an ocean, you sit on your back porch, you sit on your front porch and watch people walk by, their eyes were watching God in that novel, that the porch is strong there too. So it's a big part of Southern literature and Southern life.
That's true. The porches do come up a lot, and they still do.
Well, we love having, we have a back porch, my wife and I, we love spending time out there, and the house we bought didn't really have it had kind of a small step into the house, and we branched that out and put a little roof over it and made a little front porch because we just love the whole idea of it. And so it's still a big part of my life.
I like the way that you tied in the conversations that they had there and how much they seemed to like John F. Kennedy during that time period. And also the difference between just explaining why they appreciated people like Martin Luther King and that thin line where, it's okay to be him, but it's not okay for you to get an education so you could be like him.
Yeah, that was very difficult. First, almost so many homes, if you walked into a Black home in that time period, you were apt to see 3 photos on the wall: Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and Jesus Christ. And that would be in so many homes. It would be, if you walked into a house and didn't see it, you would say, what happened? So Martin Luther King was in the book, and also just in my life at that period of time, was, at least in my community, was godlike. And maybe that's in a way why you felt like the kids, whatever happened to Martin Luther King was, a gift from God. And maybe we all couldn't rise to that level, which is why he was so special to us. And so sometimes you look at it that way. Not everybody can be the great doctor. So we don't even aspire to that. So not everybody could be Martin Luther King. So we don't aspire to that. We just follow his lead. And it seems strange even for kids around us to want to aspire to that, because nobody else in this community ever has had that. So that's the difference between Canaan and looking at somebody like Martin Luther King, and not even thinking about, the folks who argued, Brown versus Board of Education, that kind of thing. So, or the many other African Americans who had done extraordinary things. We just didn't think about that.
But weren't they acting white too?
Well, that's a good question. And the answer would be in the mindset of the people of Canaan, the Black people who are on the porch, they would be if they were living in Canaan and trying to live outside of life in Canaan. But they separate that because they're not in Canaan. These people come from someplace else. And like I said, they're like sent to us to lead and that sort of thing. But we're not those people. As one of the folks on the porch said, when Evan says, I'm going to be somebody, and she says, no, you're not. You're an N-word by any other name is still an N-word, and you're going to be an N-word. Because that's what she thought of herself. And that's what she thought of all the other Black people in the area. And she just thought that's what he's going to be, because that's what everybody is. So there's, in a way, Evan's success should become kind of like Martin Luther King in the sense that they can look and say, oh, it actually can happen here, because look what this little boy is doing. But they're afraid of what this little boy is doing because, and the parents are the primary example. So they have what they have in the Black community. They're in the hierarchy or the top of the Black community. They're afraid of losing themselves, that and their Blackness and their culture, if they allow their son to bring white people into that. And so that fear was palpable in my life, and that fear is palpable in the book, I believe. So it's race is such a complicated issue. And I also think that, I work very hard to show that. And even when Bojack and Patty and Evan are having a conversation towards the end of the book in the woods and having pizza, and they start to have this conversation about, can we ever get rid of race? So it's a complicated thing. And I hope that when people finish the book, they recognize how complicated it is and recognize what a fight we have, because it has lasted for so long and there's so many levels now to it.
I think you did a great job bringing all of those levels out. I also think it gives people an opportunity to think about their own actions, the way that they should or shouldn't react in a situation, and how saying the wrong thing, or even with his friends, when that final fight happened, before Evan really fought back.
Right.
And he had these friends and they happened to be white. And then because his friend got beat up because they couldn't find him.
Right.
The family cutting him out.
Cutting him out, right.
That's so sad. It was like, that's the last thing you should be doing. You should be bringing him in to protect him too.
Yes, but I think in my place, and it was be very realistic, because those people wouldn't want, again, him to affect how they're seen in the public and in their community. So Evan is kind of, a negative thing for anybody to try and bring them into their lives. So, and I just think about that for a child, to think that whenever you touch somebody's life, they think it's going to be a negative thing. So they just don't want to be around you. And how does a child handle that? So without Bojack, without Mama Jenny, and then eventual Eliza Blizzard, he wouldn't have been able to handle that. And that's why his brother is in the book. So I put Mark in the book because I wanted people to see, here's a kid who had everything that Evan had in terms of brains, in terms of opportunity, but it didn't work for him because he didn't have the village. He didn't have the support system, and he didn't know how to go ask for it. He was afraid to go ask for it because he was afraid of the community's response to him. So therefore, he really allowed himself to be, pulled back. And when at the time when, well, I won't tell readers, I won't say anything about it because I think it's a major point of the book when Mark resolves his situation. But I think having him teaches people, a little bit about Evan's struggle, a little bit how to help people in that struggle. And I will say, one thing I have had from many white readers, I have lots of emails, and when I was on tour, people would say to me, those conversations you had with Mama Jenny had with Evan, I never understood what the conversation was that Black people had in their homes about white people and about their situation in the United States. And to be allowed into that conversation was so enlightening for me. People have said it changed their focus on race relations and how they think about race. So that, for me, that's an incredible benefit, a result of reading this book. And I'm so happy about that. So it's like you said, people will look at things differently now because they've gone along with Evan on this journey.
Yeah, and you hope that I think at the end of the book, you just hope that you can be a better person than most of the people he met along the way.
Yes.
And be a positive influence in somebody's life, no matter what color they are or what their background is. But I mean, his journey, he was able to be successful, but the story starts at a point in his life where he has a child. And it's that turning point where, you're always afraid you're going to be the worst part of your parents. And,
right.
It's just that journey to learn to be better, make better choices, make sure that your children have more opportunities than you had for yourself.
Right.
And how incredibly important that is.
And that's why, people have said, Evan's parents were so angry with them. And I said, well, I wanted you to be angry with them. And I made them who they were because I wanted you to see, I wanted to highlight, again, Evan's struggle. And if this kid doesn't even have his parents behind him, if they can't see the simple thing that he's trying to do just to get an education, then, you really going to worry about this child. How can he make it? And how does the parents' actions, what does that say about who we were at that time as a country in terms of our race relations? So the parents are their own study, as is the character Taliaferro Pitts, who is, Evan's nemesis. He's a study in how race has affected us and what it has done to people as well. And I've had lots of great conversations about that character.
I thought that Mary Batten.
Yes.
I thought that she summed it up the best. If you aren't already woke, you will be after reading the book.
Yes, I love that quote too.
It was just true. And I was really thankful to my parents for the experiences I had growing up after I read it, just because I did get to meet so many people from different backgrounds. And I was lucky to be taught, that it didn't make any difference. Everybody was welcome.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I definitely didn't have that. And, and we didn't know so many things. We were so isolated. So there were Black and white people. There were Baptist and Methodist people. And that's basically it. There were no Catholics that I can remember. One Jewish family. And, I hadn't even had Chinese food until I went to college. So, I mean, that's how remote and it was for us. So it was a very different kind of life, and it was, an awakening time of that whole what we went through in that little town. I think kind of resembled what the South was going through at that time. So I'm thankful to folks like Mary Batten who read it and who understood what I was trying to do. It's a beautiful thing when people really get what you're trying to say and get your work. And she did, and I think that's why when that review came in, the publisher, they were so excited about having that quote because it kind of really crystallized it. And it's a great quote, draw people to the book.
Yes, it did draw me to the book. And your dedication really shows how much heart you really have when you're researching a story. And
thank you.
What you're going to deliver. It made me so excited to read it.
Well, that's very nice of you. And if you met my wife, you'd understand where that came from.
That's great. Well, I'd love to have you back to learn more about how you got into your profession.
I would love to come back and talk about it. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And do you have any new books coming out soon?
Well, I'm working on, I'm almost finished with the next one. And it is also like Evan. It's based on sort of an issue, and continues the issue of childhood literacy, but it's combined with the idea of redemption. So Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, whose job it was to represent folks on death row. Just a Mercy, his book has been out. And I think it has also been a movie. And one of the things he said is that we are more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And so I took that out of the realm of prison, and death row and all that, and just put it into the rest of our lives. When I read it, I just took it someplace else and found its own meaning for me. And that was in today's world with Twitter and Facebook and everything else. What if you made a mistake, particularly if you were a person of note? And it's not about cancel culture. It's about the scarlet letter of the 21st century. Can you find redemption? Because you can't hide. Where are you going to hide from social media? Can you find redemption? So this character is searching for redemption, finds himself in a place where not to expect to find himself. And he is trying to help the community he's fallen into through things like literacy and finding themselves. So it's about redemption and it's about helping your fellow man.
Well, thank you for sharing this important message during this time period where Black lives and all lives matter. It
Absolutely.
really talks to society and the injustices.
Thank you, Denise Marie, for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you want to understand a little more about the society you live in, The Emancipation of Evan Walls will definitely open your heart.